Hi, gentle and of course very modern apes. I've got something a little bit different and a little bit special for you here today. As everyone who's kind of been hanging around on this channel recently probably knows, we do a lot of debunking of the idea of young Earth creationism here, and we tend to do it from a scientific slant, right? We look at it, take these ideas at face value, and examine how they are wrong if we use any minute measure of empiricism or conventional science. And every now and again, we will dip our little non-opposable toe into the waters of biblical academia and why, although young Earth creationism is of course absurd from a scientific standpoint, it's also really kind of bonkers from a biblical interpretation standpoint. Now, I am of course not a biblical scholar, but today I'm going to present to you a lovely conversation that I had the opportunity to have with someone who is a biblical scholar, and that is the world-renowned scholar and academic, Dr. Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he has edited or written over 33 books. That's like half of the number of books in the Bible, by the way. He has also added a couple of New York bestsellers, and there's 6 of them to be precise. You got Misquoting Jesus, you got How Jesus Became God, and Forged, among others. As you guys also probably know, I would consider myself a good scholarship and methodology enjoyer, and Dr. Ehrman really exemplifies this in his field. He's got this brand new course coming out, which is titled In the Beginning, History, Legends, and Myth in Genesis. And that's what I'm here to kind of help delve into a bit. So without further ado, here is the interview that I had with Dr. Bart Ehrman. And before you even say it, I know, my mic is bad again. Please cut me a little bit of slack. I was so stymied, I was so nervous about talking to Dr. Ehrman that I think I just used my bad mic. I think I forgot to fix the settings. But I do think that this is still very consumable, so please enjoy. All right. Okay. So, Dr. Ehrman, I really hope that some of these questions are going to strike you as original, but I feel the need to cover some of the basics before we really get into it, just to kind of provide a background for the fact that we're talking about Genesis. We're talking about the historical and academic interpretation of Genesis. So I wanted to start by asking you, how does the Genesis story compare? So Genesis 1 and 2, how do they compare to other sort of creation stories of the location of the ancient Near East?
Yeah, so Genesis begins obviously with the creation in chapters 1 and 2, and it's interesting that 1 and 2 actually are 2 different creation stories that are odds with each other, um, and but there are similarities, especially to Genesis 1, with other stories in the ancient Near East. That we have so we have a story called the Enuma Elish, which is a which is a it's this older story that has very many similarities to the Genesis creation story. And so whoever wrote Genesis is not like making stuff up out of his head, and he's heard stories and they've adapted the stories for their own Israelite context.
Yeah, that kind of adds, I'm going to kind of go out of order because that touched on something that I wanted to kind of see your thoughts on, because I've heard before that Genesis has almost acts as a polemic after the Babylonian captivity. So that the reason why it takes so much sort of from some of these other, A&E sources is because it's sort of this way of the Hebrews to say, yeah, it's fine that you think, Marduk or whoever did this creation, but actually it was Yahweh who really did it. So we'll just take your story, tweak it, and make it our own. What do you think about that?
It's possible. It's certainly possible. In the Babylonian story, Marduk as you said, is the main god,
Mm.
and he and Marduk creates the world in a similar way to the way God creates the world in Genesis.
Mm.
It does look like this part of Genesis was written after the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century. It comes from a source. So the Genesis is usually thought to be made up of a number of different sources by scholars.
Right.
It's not, Moses didn't write it, but it's a number of sources written at different times.
Mm.
And the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, is a source called the P source that's usually dated to the 6th century after the Babylonian captivity. And so it may well be that that it's a polemic against this Babylonian story, or it may just be that this is like they're tweaking the story. The thing is, since we can't get into the author's head, we don't know if he's like really going after those Babylonians, or if
Right.
he's like, well, that's a useful story, I'm going to modify this. This is, they're onto something here.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I've heard it said before that, it's difficult enough to translate a language, but to translate a culture is a different animal entirely. Which leads me, I argue here online with young Earth creationists, being as my background is, I like human evolution, and I think evolutionary biology is fascinating. So naturally, the ancient age of the Earth and the sort of animal nature of humans clashes with that young Earth creationism, who kind of suppose that they're taking Genesis as purely and as literally and as God intended, as a sort of correct interpretation. And one of the things that they tend to say is, that Genesis 1 is this creation story, and Genesis 2 hones in on Adam and Eve specifically. What do you make of that? Is Genesis 1 creation story or 2?
It's two creation stories. I don't think there's much doubt about that from anybody who just, unless you've got a faith commitment that says they have to be the same, then if you just read them, they're different stories, and they're quite clearly different. I talk about this in I devote an entire lecture just to this particular issue in my course. But the thing is, when you read the Adam and Eve story in chapter 2, it is explicit that there are no plants on earth yet. There are no animals on earth yet. God makes Adam first. Then he puts the plant life there. Then he makes the animals.
Right.
And in Genesis 1, it's the other way around.
Right.
So it's not only that both don't work scientifically. Obviously, it doesn't work for humans to do the first thing. That doesn't work scientifically. But also Genesis 1 doesn't work scientifically because plant life is created before there's a sun.
Right. Right. Right.
I mean, it's like, and so
it's difficult, right? It might be a little bit a hard pill to swallow.
I mean, I do think these are great. They're great myths, and they're important myths. But if you take them scientifically, you're just missing the boat. You just that's the way to read them.
Well, yeah, and that kind of leads me to ask, has it always been the case within the church that Genesis, and certainly within the Christian church, but passed into the sort of Jewish history as well? Has it always been the case that there's been a sect of folks who want to take Genesis literally, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, so I think until the Enlightenment, until the 17th century, people just didn't. Occasionally somebody would say, well, that looks like a contradiction, but people just didn't think that way. The Bible was the authority, and they didn't question it, and they didn't have any scientific grounds for questioning it. They didn't know, and how would they know? And so they did take it literally, but it was because there wasn't really an alternative. But the literal interpretation wasn't the issue for them. It was you wouldn't even say, did you take it literally? How else am I supposed to take it? But they thought that it really happened. But the point wasn't that it happened. The point was that it's teaching us something.
Right.
When people start trying to insist on its scientific values, like they're missing the point.
Right. Right. Yeah, that strikes me as pretty par for the course, really, for all of the Old Testament and really a lot of the New Testament as well. It's presenting this story. Right. And there may be, in many cases, some kind of historical grounding to it, at least in experience, right? That it felt that way to the people at the time. But not necessarily, like you're right. It doesn't seem to be that much of an issue, at least from a plain reading, that it was meant to be so literalist, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that, I'm actually a historian by nature. I mean, I'm in what really happened. And so I am very interested in what really happened. And I think, that you can say a lot more about the New Testament than the Old Testament, because I mean, look at Genesis, you're talking about people writing down stories centuries after they allegedly occurred. We're not talking about 40 or 50 years the way you are with the New Testament gospel. You're talking about centuries and centuries. So the likelihood of having something historical, and people say, well, back then they had oral tradition, they kept it all accurate. Yeah, no.
Anyone who's ever played a game of telephone knows that doesn't tend to work out well.
and you do it over centuries, and you start changing the languages in different cultures and different
Yeah.
places. Like, oh my God, yeah, and things
Yeah,
change.
that's a really good point. I hadn't even considered the linguistic shifts that would have to occur. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
even local dialects are gonna skew the meaning of something. We have that in English of all things today. Contemporaneous languages have,
Well, really
sort of,
hard with Genesis. You were saying like it's hard to interpret a culture, but the problem with the Hebrew Bible is that it's the only Hebrew literature from that period. And so
really,
English, if you write something in English and somebody doesn't know what a word means, they can just see how the word is used in 100
yeah,
other writings. And the
yeah,
same with Greek and Latin and other Hebrew from that period, like in the 8th century, the 10th century, we don't have other stuff to compare it. So there are
yeah,
places where we don't know what the word means.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it looks like it's an animal with 4 legs. Other than that, I don't know. Is it an aardvark? I don't know.
Yeah. They're like, oh yeah, the beasts of the field, right? It's like livestock, kind
Yeah,
of maybe.
yeah,
Sometimes things of that nature. It's
yeah.
that's very interesting. Just generally speaking, because I hadn't considered that, the fact that it's like there are entire sections that are kind of, our translation was created using context clues. It almost seems, which is,
Yeah. Well, it's hard. There are passages that are very hard to translate, both because of the grammar and because of the vocabulary.
yeah,
And and we don't. It's such a. I go into all this in my course because it's also when these things were written, when our manuscripts of these things are the entire book of Genesis is basically based on the manuscript that was produced in the around the year 1000 of the Common Era. And if it's talking about stuff that was happening in, say, the 18th century BCE,
yeah, a
it's
little bit early, just a smidge.
about 3,000 years before you get a copy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of stuff can happen in 3,000 years. Yeah, I wanted to ask you something too. Given that this is about kind of Genesis generally, I get a lot of pushback from young Earth creationists who take this very bizarre stance that I guess is not that bizarre when you think about that they're young Earth creationists, but they take the stance that with Adam and Eve, they have Cain and Abel, their sons, right? Now Cain kills Abel, and Adam and Eve are of course very distraught over this, and he's worried that whoever will find him will kill him, right? And God's like, listen, I'll put a mark on you so that no one who finds you will kill you. How do you think that the Hebrews understood this to be, like, that Cain is afraid of other people, or were there seriously only 4 people on the earth at that time, right?
There were only 3 at that time.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And it's not only that, but then Cain marries somebody,
Yeah,
and then he builds a city.
yeah. Nod, right? In Nod.
What? How? A city? There's only 3 people on Earth, and so yeah, I know. No, it's filled with that sort of thing. But I think until the Enlightenment, people just didn't. They
Yeah,
didn't even think to question that kind of thing very much. Sometimes people would.
yeah,
Rabbis would in the Middle Ages sometimes. Some Jewish rabbis would be reading this thing and say, "Oh," and they
wait a
come up
second.
with some explanation for it. But they realize there's a problem here.
Yeah, it struck me as strange too, because it's like, God is presented as this relatively immutable character, right? He's all lasting, he's forever just, and yet he's like, hey, I want you to populate the earth via incest. But then he's also like, hey, by the way, incest is a sin. So
Yeah. So
don't do incest.
this part of this is the problem when I said that it's composed of different sources, is that you get
Yeah,
different sources that have different things in them. And one of the things is that when you read Genesis 1, God is this transcendent being, the creator, and let there be light, and there was light.
mm,
But when you get to Genesis 2 and 3 with the Adam and Eve story, God is not like that at all.
mm,
He's very anthropomorphic. He's like a
yeah,
human. When he finds Adam and Eve because he's strolling through the garden in the cool of the evening, God is.
mm,
And so, so it's no longer, and so it's a different source written at a different time with a different understanding of God, and it actually calls God different names. The name
yeah.
of God is different in these sources.
That I wonder if a parallel could be drawn to the nature of God when he's flooding the world versus the nature of God when he smells the sweet scent of Noah's sacrifice, right? It's like the eldritch being God versus like the
Yeah.
very anthropomorphic and very human,
Yeah.
intimate God.
Well, that's right. The flood story is made up of two of these sources that are intertwined, and so you'll have and not like Genesis, where Genesis 1 is from one source and Genesis 2 from another source. The flood story is like you'll have a paragraph from one source and a paragraph from the
Yeah.
other source, and whoever put it together did it like that, and it creates all sorts of weirdnesses. Like everybody thinks about Noah taking the animals on the ark 2 by 2, right? Two pairs of
Mhm.
animals, but right after it says that, God says, okay, but I want you to take 7 pairs of this kind and 2 pairs of that kind.
He's
Uh,
like, oh,
two. Which is it 7 by 2 or 2? Well, so they're different sources, and so this is another problem, of course, with Genesis.
yeah. Let me ask you, just for those curious, because a lot of the people who kind of watch my channel, I like to get into methodology a lot because I think that it elucidates the sort of how of science communication. So how is it that we determine when a piece of the Bible is written by more than one author versus a single author?
So it's a long process. I devote one of my lectures just to this point, and part of it is that you get these contradictions. They're right next to each other. You
Right.
have different writing styles. You have
Mm.
different names of God. You've got
Mm.
different themes, and so when you work at the scholars who worked on this really hard in the 19th century came up with a theory that there are four sources incorporated into the Pentateuch, the first 5
Mm.
books, including Genesis, and they're called J, E, D, and P. And you can actually, if you understand how each one works, you can actually separate them out. The flood story is fairly easy. I sometimes give this as an assignment to my students: just separate which is which source, and
Right.
they can actually work it out if they're alert. They say, "Oh my God, why did I ever think that was a coherent story?"
Yeah.
Well, nobody told you otherwise. But if you're told what to look for, you realize, wait a second, this doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. I imagine that it probably works quite similarly, like that's standardizable as a method within Genesis, but also between books, whether to find out if other books are written by a single
Yeah,
or multiple authors.
yeah, that's right. So the book of Deuteronomy itself is complete by a completely different source altogether.
Right.
Whoever wrote the three first of Genesis are not found. Well, one of them is slightly in Deuteronomy, and so yeah, so this is just standard stuff for the kind of working in ancient literature. This is the kind of thing scholars do with ancient literature generally. So they're
Yeah.
not just picking on the Bible here. They're
Yeah.
this is kind of what we do with ancient literature to figure out sources and how they've been combined.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a nice uniform method by which it can be done, right? I mean,
Yeah,
human
yeah,
authors today have different styles when we write. It's not
yeah, that's
that
right.
far-fetched to think that that could extend back.
No, if you read an anthology of short stories and the authors' names are not attached, and you think that
You can tell
maybe
the
a couple of these are written by the same author, if you've got one by Mark Twain and one by James Joyce, you're not going to have any trouble knowing these are different authors. And so if you're trained in
difference.
these languages, you've got to do it in the original languages, though. You've got to
Yeah.
in Genesis, you have to do it in Hebrew. In the New Testament, you have to do it in Greek
Yeah,
to do it.
oh, I'm so sorry. Continue, please.
No, I'm done.
No, no, I was simply going to say, yeah, I feel like, you get a lot of especially the young earth creationists say, what, I can't read my Bible in plain English? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
not
Well, you
really.
can.
It wasn't written in plain English.
Yeah, no, you can and you should, but you shouldn't say that scholars who have spent 40 years reading it in Hebrew don't know what they're talking
Mm.
about, because this is like you know it's just like any expertise, really. I mean, it's not. Uh, people object to expertise in our world, especially people who want to take the Bible literally. Often object to
Right.
expertise. They object to expertise until they go to the dentist office.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then they want an expert, or
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, they want to use their dishwasher and they get upset when it's broke. Well, you wouldn't have a dishwasher if it weren't for science. So
Yeah.
don't you distrust science?
Unfortunately, we live in a world where the death of expertise seems to be running rampant, and not for lack of experts, but for lack of trust in them.
Right.
Dr. Ehrman, thank you so much for your time. I'm getting the buzzer over here from old Dan. And I didn't get to all my questions. I'm so sad. But the good news is I certainly have the opportunity to seek out those answers by consulting this series that's coming up, this course by you. So hopefully, I can take these questions to that source and glean them there.
Okay.
Thank you so much again.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Me too. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. I was really bummed that I didn't get to ask more questions, but I'm kind of hoping that those questions are going to be answered in Dr. Ehrman's upcoming course, which I am very thrilled to kind of sink my teeth into, especially because this is an area that I'm not formally trained in, and I kind of get to be taught by someone who is, which is the point, right? I'm really excited to see how Dr. Ehrman is kind of going to deconstruct Genesis from a scholarly point of view, examining things like the hermeneutics and the ancient culture. How was it that these ancient people interpreted this story? How important was it to them? Why does it have so many similarities with other adjacent cultures? Dr. Ehrman's course is currently on sale for early bird pricing, so you can get it for $34.95. Gotta save those sweet bucks. I know I want to save money anytime I can, so I can put them into my Purchasing More Skulls fund. But that price is only going to last until February 25th, so you kind of want to get on the good foot here if you want that sweet dollar savings. If you are, however, a high roller and don't mind paying a little bit extra, you can still jump onto that course for $40, $39.95 total, at any time when the course launches here in a couple of days. So what's included in the course, you might ask? Computer, pull-up course summary. You get 6 30-minute lectures. You get PDF guides for taking those lectures, which is something that I know I appreciate because I'm a big dork and I really like to take notes alongside in kind of a systematic manner. You get frequently asked questions, and of course, you get lifetime access. So if you find yourself on your deathbed here in 40, 50, 60 years and you think, last thing I want to do, I want to refresh myself on Dr. Ehrman's series, you can do that. And if you sign up using the link in my description, you actually end up helping out this channel too. I'm an affiliate of this course, so you can help out the channel and you get a perk, a bonus. And that bonus is, of course, learning from one of the foremost experts on the subject. You know, I think the bonus is helping the channel, and the main benefit is being taught by Dr. Ehrman. So mosey on down to that description where I have remembered to place the link, and check out In the Beginning, History, Legend, and Myth in Genesis. I can certainly say that Dr. Ehrman is a gentle and very modern ape, so consider checking his work out. I think it's going to be worth your while. And so my gentle and of course very modern apes, my beautiful audience, please do take care of yourselves in the meantime.